Guests don't sit at the head table, my cousin said, lifting my place card and handing it to someone else while relatives watched. My plate was removed. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. My name is Hannah Collins. I'm 36 years old. I work as a property manager for a small residential company, handling lease agreements, maintenance disputes, and tenant rights issues every single day. I grew up in the family home my grandparents built back in the 1950s, a solid brick house with a wraparound porch and oak trees older than anyone living. Years later, I moved back to care for my widowed aunt, who owned it after my grandparents passed. My family always treated me as temporary help, despite the fact that I managed repairs, property taxes, and utility bills for nearly a decade. I live modestly, rent a small apartment when I'm not at the house, and avoid conflict whenever possible. I've been labeled the quiet one who just handles things, the person who shows up but doesn't make waves. I sacrificed multiple job promotions that would have required relocating, staying nearby to keep the house running during my aunt's long illness with Parkinson's. My relatives valued louder personalities and bigger salaries, not reliability or consistency. I never demanded recognition or praise, only wanted stability and comfort for my aunt during her final years. I wasn't rich or glamorous, never fought for attention at family gatherings, or pushed my way into conversations. But I had something they didn't expect. I had documented authority in the form of signed maintenance contracts, property tax receipts showing my payments, and years of legal correspondence proving I had operational control of that house. If you've kept a family afloat without getting credit, this is for you. If you've been treated like an outsider in your own home, subscribe. Share your story in the comments if you've been overlooked despite doing all the real work. This is about quiet responsibility that deserves respect. Subscribe, drop a comment, and click hype. Let's go. The family reunion was framed as a celebration of my aunt's life, held at the house 6 weeks after her funeral. The smell of catered food filled the dining room, and relatives I barely knew filled chairs at tables that had been rented specifically for the event. I helped set up that morning, arranging flowers and making sure everything looked the way my aunt would have wanted. My cousin Derek approached me near the head table, where I'd placed my things, and picked up my place card without asking. "Guests don't sit at the head table, Hannah," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. He handed the card to my uncle's wife. My plate was removed by someone I didn't recognize. I stood there, unsure where I was supposed to go now, while relatives watched with expressions ranging from pity to indifference. Later, my uncle stood and announced to the gathered family that the property would be sold within the month and proceeds would be divided among the primary heirs. He distributed printed sheets showing the proposed distribution. My name wasn't on it. Not once. I raised my hand slightly, feeling my face grow hot. I've been managing the taxes and repairs here for years. I paid for the new roof and the furnace replacement. My uncle barely glanced at me. "Paying bills doesn't make you family, Hannah. You were helping out. We appreciate it, but this is a family matter." Neighbors who'd been invited watched the exchange. Extended relatives shifted uncomfortably. I was handed an official-looking notice by my cousin, a typed document stating I needed to vacate the premises within 30 days. The humiliation was public, deliberate, and thorough. I felt small and powerless. Then, just as my uncle began discussing real estate agents, a man in a suit appeared in the doorway. Mr. Bennett, a lawyer I recognized from my aunt's medical appointments. "Excuse me," he said clearly. "I need to review the ownership records before any sale can proceed." The betrayals came in layers after that gathering. First, the public narrative shifted. My relatives began telling extended family and neighbors that I'd been a paid helper, someone hired to assist my aunt but never actually part of the family. My cousin posted on social media about how grateful the family was to my uncle for protecting family assets from people trying to take advantage. The post got dozens of likes. A coworker saw it and asked cautiously if I'd been evicted from somewhere. The shame was overwhelming, but I stayed quiet. Second, the physical exclusion became aggressive. I returned to the house 2 days later to find the locks had been changed. My belongings were stacked in boxes on the front porch, exposed to the weather and anyone passing by. Childhood photos I'd hung on the walls were gone, replaced with generic art. My old bedroom, where I'd slept whenever I stayed to care for my aunt, had been stripped and relabeled. A cousin walked past and mentioned casually that they were turning it into a guest room, as if I never lived there at all. Third came paper manipulation. I checked online records and discovered utility accounts had been backdated to show my uncle as the responsible party for the past year, erasing my payments. Maintenance invoices I'd kept were suddenly being altered or disputed by contractors who'd been paid under pressure to revise their records. A realtor listed the house online without waiting for probate, advertising it as an estate sale opportunity with photos and a price that made my stomach turn. I could see the house I'd maintained for years being marketed like a foreclosure. But instead of collapsing, something shifted inside me. I started documenting everything systematically. I pulled receipts from my files, printed emails, gathered contractor contracts that had my signature, collected property tax payment confirmations. I organized them chronologically, cross-referenced them with dates, and built a timeline that was undeniable. My emotions shifted from hurt to something colder and more controlled. I stopped arguing with relatives or trying to explain myself. I let them believe I was powerless, that I'd accepted defeat. I disappeared from their conversations and let them proceed with their plans. But I was working, quietly, methodically. What they didn't know, what my family had completely failed to consider, was that I had copies of every contract and every payment I'd ever made on that property. I'm a property manager. Documentation is what I do for a living. I had digital backups of tax filings going back 8 years, all showing my name and my bank account as the source of payment. I had repair permits from the city listing me as the authorized property manager. I had signed authorizations for my aunt giving me legal authority to make decisions about maintenance and improvements. But the most important thing I had was a voicemail. My aunt had left it 14 months before she died, when her speech was still clear and her mind was sharp. I'd saved it because I missed her voice. In it, she said, "Hannah, honey, you've been taking care of this house like it's yours, because it should be. You're the one who's kept it standing. I want you to keep it after I'm gone." I had email exchanges with my aunt's doctor and financial advisor where relatives were copied, messages showing they'd refused to help financially or physically with her care. I had maintenance agreements with contractors listing me as the primary contact and decision maker. And I'd done something else. I'd filed a quiet title inquiry with the county clerk's office requesting a formal review of ownership records. I didn't tell anyone. I just submitted the paperwork and waited. I had a plan they never saw coming. I watched from a distance as they proceeded with their sale attempt, measuring rooms and discussing renovations and profit margins. And I waited. The person who changed everything was Mr. Bennett, the family lawyer who had handled my aunt's affairs for over 30 years. He contacted me 3 days after the reunion, asking to meet privately at a coffee shop away from the family. I sat across from him in a booth that smelled like burnt espresso and cleaning solution. He set a folder on the table between us. "Your aunt came to see me 2 years ago," he said carefully. "She was worried about what would happen after she passed. She told me you'd been the only one helping her, the only one who cared about the house. She wanted to protect you." He opened the folder and showed me an amended deed, filed with the county 18 months before my aunt died. It included survivorship rights, granting me legal ownership upon her death due to my role as caregiver and property manager. He advised me to stay completely silent and not reveal what I knew until the formal document review he'd already scheduled. Meanwhile, my family grew more arrogant by the day. My uncle scheduled showings with multiple realtors and brought potential buyers through the property. My cousins posted photos online showing them measuring rooms and discussing how they'd renovate once the sale went through. Relatives who barely knew my aunt talked openly about what they'd do with their share of the money. One cousin mentioned buying a boat. Another talked about a down payment on a condo. The realtor put up a professional listing with staged photos and an open house date. Mr. Bennett quietly scheduled what he called an official document review meeting, sending formal notices to all family members listed in my aunt's will. They assumed it was routine paperwork, a formality before the sale could finalize. They showed up confident, even celebratory. The tension built as I watched them spend money in their heads, money they thought was already theirs. The meeting was held at Mr. Bennett's office downtown, a space that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. The walls were lined with law books, and a heavy wooden table dominated the center of the room. My family arrived dressed casually, my uncle even joking about getting this over with so they could focus on the sale. I sat in the corner, quiet, ignored, exactly the way they expected. Mr. Bennett took his seat at the head of the table and opened a large folder. He asked everyone to settle in, and then he began. My uncle presented transfer documents first, claiming sole ownership as my aunt's closest living relative and executor of her estate. He slid the papers across the table with confidence. Mr. Bennett accepted them, reviewed them briefly, and set them aside. Then he spoke calmly. "I need to present an amended deed that supersedes these documents." The room went very still. He read from the official county filing. "This amendment grants Hannah Collins survivorship rights and operational control of the property located at 428 Maple Street, effective upon the death of the property owner." He held up the notarized document. "This was filed 18 months before your aunt's passing and is legally binding." My uncle started to interrupt, but Mr. Bennett raised his hand. He continued reading my aunt's notarized statement, written in her own hand and witnessed by 2 independent parties. "I name Hannah Collins as my property successor due to her years of dedicated caregiving and financial stewardship." Then he played the voicemail, my aunt's voice filling the office. The sound of her speaking, clear and firm, saying I should keep the house. It was like she was in the room. I submitted my payment records, tax receipts, contractor agreements, everything I documented over the years. Mr. Bennett questioned my uncle about the backdated utility accounts and altered maintenance invoices, his voice sharp and professional. The silence in that room was absolute. You could hear breathing. My uncle tried to speak, stammering something about a misunderstanding, about not knowing the deed had been changed. Mr. Bennett's expression didn't change. "Falsifying ownership records and altering financial documents can constitute fraud. I'm obligated to report this if it continues." He looked at each family member. "Hannah Collins is the legal owner of this property. Any sale attempts are void. Any claims of ownership are unfounded." My family's assumed inheritance collapsed in seconds. The celebratory mood evaporated. My uncle's face went pale. Nobody spoke. I changed the locks legally that same week, using a licensed locksmith and providing my ownership documentation when he asked. I canceled the realtor listing and sent formal notices to all parties that the property was no longer for sale. Some relatives attempted apologies, awkward phone calls where they claimed they'd been misled or hadn't understood the situation. Others simply disappeared, blocking me on social media and avoiding any mention of the whole situation. I preserved the house exactly as my aunt had intended, keeping her furniture and maintaining the gardens she'd loved. I donated unused items to community shelters in her name, things she'd talked about giving away but never had the energy to organize. I reflected often during those first months on the difference between quiet stewardship and loud entitlement, on how the people who showed up and did the work were rarely the ones who got credit until the truth forced itself into the light. I realized that ownership isn't about who speaks the loudest or who has the most family connections. It's about responsibility, consistency, and showing up when it's hard. They called me a guest because I was quiet, because I didn't demand attention or fight for recognition. But the truth had my name on it, written in county records, signed by my aunt, documented in years of payments and care. The truth didn't need me to shout. It just needed to exist. If you were treated like an outsider in your own home, you already know how deep that cuts. If relatives tried to erase you despite all the work you did, share your story below. Tell us about being excluded while doing everything that mattered. Subscribe to a community that values accountability and truth over volume and connections. Stand firm when others try to rewrite history. You're not alone. Click Hype to help this story reach others who desperately need it. Your story has power. If you felt a connection to mine, please subscribe and share your journey in the comments. Every hype you give this video helps empower someone else. Thank you for being here and for listening.